Greetings and welcome to Zoom with Interpreters. Tips and tricks to minimize lag, avoid bad connections, and more. If you are a paralegal or you are a legal assistant working at a law firm, or if you work at a courthouse and you coordinate the interpreters, then this presentation is for you if you're in the legal field and you work with interpreters. In this webinar, I'm going to show you first how to minimize lag and get a good connection. Two, how to eliminate background noise. Three, what to do when people are using their cell phones. Four, how to use Zoom's interpreter platform. And five, what interpretation equipment should your interpreters have? My name is Robert Holloway, Korean name Shintosu, and I am a court interpreter currently working in the state of Illinois primarily, and the owner of Midwest Korean Translation. We are an interpretation and translation firm that specializes in the Korean language, especially for court, for criminal, divorce, and personal injury cases. So, uh, it's no secret. COVID has hit the globe and is affecting all of us, especially the way that court proceedings are carried out. Remote hearings are becoming the norm. And in some cases, remote trials are being held. So by now, every day the majority of your courthouse hearings may even be conducted remotely by Zoom, while courtrooms are pretty much empty, like you may see in the pictures. In fact, maybe you'll stay on Zoom through the end of this year unless a party wants to come in or a defendant is in custody and wants an interpreter there with them. So we can't ignore Zoom and we can't ignore remote interpretation. It's not the best. Of course, we would want things to be in person. It's more personable. You can see people, you can be next to people and hear better. But we, for the time being, got to do what we got to do, right? Now, the thing about Zoom is it has many issues, especially when you have a party and an interpreter that you have to deal with on Zoom. There are more factors that you have to deal with. So in this presentation, I'm going to help you to work through those. Now, the majority of what I'll be showing you is what interpreters are using now in the interpretation world. So I figure we share the information. We're on the same side and try and produce the best outcome and results that we possibly can. Okay, if this is you, leave a comment. Zoom just isn't working well. No matter the connection, it's slow. It's choppy. In general, it just doesn't work. It moves very slow, and you think, what is the hype all about? Zoom is perhaps the most common interpreter, or excuse me, the most common remote meeting platform now, but it's not all that. If Zoom is not working well, the first thing that you want to do is update it. This is very simple. To update to the newest version, you sign in to your account, and in the top right corner, you'll see the icon for your name. You click on that, and you have the menu bar that will drop down. As you can see, click on check for updates. Now, keep in mind that you are going to be working with LEPs, limited English persons, and then as well with interpreters. So you want to make sure that everyone on their end updates Zoom. So this is very important. Maybe you want to put it in your procedures for Zoom that you send to interpreters and let LEPs know, however you want to do it. But everyone should be updated on their end. Next, how to minimize lag and get a good connection. The first step that I'm going to suggest is increasing the internet speed. Why? Because lagging and freezing are commonly the result of poor internet connection. You want to have a good connection, so what is recommended is an upload and download network speed of at least 5 megabytes per second. The more, the better. If you have Comcast or some internet service, you know that there are different levels of internet speed based on the amount that you pay each month. So you, of course, want to have a solid, a good, very fast internet speed, both you, your interpreter, and the person who will be calling in that needs the interpreter. You also, if you have or if you have two networks, commonly you'll have a 5 gigahertz network, 5.0, and then a 2.0 gigahertz Wi-Fi network. If you have two, you might have one that you have for guests, and then one that you have for staff, or one that you have for general, and then another one. Whatever the case, it is good to disable the 2.4, the slower gigahertz Wi-Fi, in order to reduce the broadcast. This will help increase the internet speed. Now, if you have an IT team at the court, you just let them know. They take care of this. It's not a problem. If you want to check the internet speed, it's very simple. If you don't know what your internet speed is right now, then go to speedtest.net. This is one of the many websites that you can go to in order to check your internet speed and see if it is acceptable, if it is fast enough. If you can also Google other websites, that is not a problem. Speed test is just one example that I have used personally that works well. Next step, how to minimize lag and get a good connection, is to use an Ethernet cord. Now, Wi-Fi isn't always reliable, right? You may be on the computer, you can be right next to the modem, and sometimes just the connection, for whatever reason, goes in and out. If you want to guarantee the fastest internet possible, use an Ethernet cord, like a Cat5 or a Cat6 cable. This is the best option. Your interpreters, if they are keeping up with the profession, know and should have a solid Ethernet cord for whenever they interpret, no exception. Next, how to minimize lag and get a good connection. Do not use a cell phone. Let your interpreters and LEPs know that they are not allowed to use cell phones. Of course, that'll be on the court. I can't prohibit this as an interpreter, but I can strongly recommend. The thing is, you can't hook up a cell phone to the Ethernet. It's always going to be on Wi-Fi. So in addition to that, cell phones tend to have many apps that can slow down the connection. Even right now, you open up your cell phone, maybe you have Facebook open, or LinkedIn, or Instagram, or some other, calendar apps or notes. There's a ton, right? So each and every one of these apps is going to slow down your cell phone. That's why, at least one of the reasons why, when you first bought the cell phone, it's super fast. And after a couple of months, after you've downloaded a good 20 or 30 apps, now the cell phone has slowed down. It takes a little bit longer to open up the camera application, or it takes a little bit longer to scroll through Facebook versus when you first purchased the cell phone. Now, this type of cell phone you don't want to have and you don't want to use with Zoom. In addition, phone calls, texts can come in at any time and interrupt the connection. So you do not want that. You don't want to be in the middle or have someone be in the middle of a Zoom call and then they say at a hearing and then say, I got a call come in. One second, please. Not acceptable. You wouldn't accept that in court, right? If it was in person. So do not accept that, I recommend. So, of course, I'm going to emphasize that you close other apps, programs, and downloads, even if you are on the computer. If you're on the computer, close other apps, programs, and downloads that are going on. Anything in the background that you do not need, that calculator, you don't need it in the hearing, or uh, browser windows with Facebook and YouTube. You don't need those open during the hearing. If that's the case, close them. WhatsApp, anything like that. One more thing that you can do is to change your Zoom settings. If you go sign into Zoom and in the upper right hand corner, you'll see the gear. You click on the gear, and two of the settings that you can disable in order to help get a good connection are when you go into the click on video on the left hand side of the menu bar, and under video you'll see options for enable HD and touch up my appearance. These are options in order to boost the quality of your video, but they're not necessary for Zoom to run efficiently. So if you disable these, then they will help to get a good connection. Next, sound issues. Now, if you've signed into a meeting and there's background noise coming from another person's computer, leave a comment. In fact, I know you have. If you're watching this, I know you have. If you've ever used Zoom before, we all know there's background noise. It's annoying, right? It can be echoes coming from another computer. It might even be sirens. It can be, maybe dishes in the background. It can be other people in the background or children. There's tons of sound issues. So how do you deal with those? First step, eliminating background noise, is you want to meet beforehand and work everything out. The first thing that you want to meet about is make it a requirement that interpreters are in a quiet area. They should already know this, both interpreters and LEPs. Good professional interpreters, I'll tell you. Now, if they are working remotely, if they're accepting remote assignments, have a room or office dedicated to remote interpretation so that there are no disturbances. One of the interpreters that works on our team at Midwest Korean Translation, he has a room at a different house. So he lives in a house, but he goes to a different house, his mother's house, because in that house there's a soundproof room that he has that's dedicated solely for remote interpretation. In there he knows there's no sirens that can be heard, there's no children, there's no dogs barking, anything like that. So this is what your interpreters should have. This is an important point to go over in your prep meeting. On the other hand, I did this presentation at a courthouse and they told me that there was an instance where one of the LEPs was calling into a hearing at McDonald's. You do not want that. You don't want to be in a hearing and then people are listening to the sound of burgers being flipped or orders being made and French fries and all of this. Have a dedicated space. Even so this is what you want to emphasize in your meeting beforehand. Another tip for eliminating background noise, if you aren't familiar, there are noise cancellation apps. So one example is an app called Crisp, K-R-I-S-P. If you install this app, it will allow sound to come through more clearly. It can also cut background noise from others on the call, so you don't hear their noise either. Next, what do you do if there are echoes or feedback? Have you ever been on a Zoom call and a person's voice echoes, 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 or there's feedback, like the same feedback where, for example, you go to an event where there's a DJ, and then sometimes, depending on where the DJ stands or where a person stands, you'll get that loud noise, right? And they have to move out of the way of the speaker. So when you are on Zoom, what do you do in order to deal with those situations? Well, in the case of echoes and feedback, solution is to eliminate extra devices, because a common culprit is someone using two devices. For example, I'm on the computer now. If I have my phone and I'm in a Zoom meeting, I have both the computer and my phone either around, or even I have it around, plus I'm on the Zoom call with my phone as well. The sound from one device will interfere with the sound from another device. They're too close together. So you want to eliminate any extra devices. Keep your phone away from the computer if you have it near you. Next topic, what do you do when people are using their cell phones? Yes, I've heard instances of people using their cell phones in court hearings, calling into court hearings. I just gave the example of someone calling in at McDonald's. So, uh, you know, it happens. Sometimes petitioners and respondents, they're on their cell phones. But when this happens, of course, the lag is terrible. It's choppy. So what do you do? Think about what your courthouse policy is. Do you have a policy on cell phones? Now, this is more of a recommendation or a tip. So please keep this in mind because I don't work at your firm or your courthouse. But when people are on their cell phones, the first thing, the most simple, is you want to prohibit them. Ultimately, again, it's your courthouse's or your law firm's policy. This is just my recommendation as a humble interpreter. Don't allow it. Okay. You don't want to allow cell phones. And you can do this essentially by having a meeting beforehand. This is another point that you can discuss in your prep meeting for that hearing or that trial. Strongly encourage all participants to have a strong connection, strong internet connection, Ethernet, and a quiet place. If you are meeting beforehand with an interpreter, it may cost you because you'll have to pay for the interpreter for that time, but essentially it could cost you more if you don't meet and then run into these sorts of issues later that you could have avoided. So not every single interpreter is up to date on how remote interpretation is working. You want to make sure yours is. So double check. Now, there are some situations where you can't avoid it. Maybe some of your LEPs, they can't afford a computer. They simply don't have one, and they honestly can't afford one. Or other situations, maybe it broke the day before. Who knows? There are many instances where you actually just cannot avoid it, and someone has to call in to the hearing. Do not let them call in from Mickey D's. Uh, Keep in mind that, again, professional interpreters don't use cell phones. So interpreters who are getting paid, they need to find a way, whether it be borrowing someone else's computer or however. Zoom is not acceptable, or excuse me, cell phones are not acceptable and definitely strongly recommended against for your LEPs, petitioners, respondents that are calling in. Next, what do you do if your sound system isn't great? You have a Polycom or some sort of sound system in the court, and overall you're thinking that it's just not great. Again, I'm an interpreter. I am not an IT expert. However, in my experience, um, considering my experience, I give these recommendations. Of course, put this in the hands of your IT team. If you have an IT team, speak to your IT team. Let them know that your sound system isn't great. There are many things that they can do that I've seen IT teams do in order to improve the quality of the system. You might have to, finagle with this and that, but this is my first recommendation. They'll likely know what's best. Robert does not know what is best with your particular sound system. The second thing is to update the equipment. And I say that this is very important because remote interpretation is not going to stop anytime soon. Especially interpretation is not going to stop anytime soon, but remote interpretation is not going to stop anytime soon, considering how COVID has hit the globe. And people are saying that remote interpretation is actually working to a degree. It's not, again, in person. It's not the best, but uh, you want to make sure that even after everything blows over, people are because people are going to continue to utilize remote interpretation. You want to make sure or keep in mind that it will be a good investment because it's not like you won't need it in the future. So there will be some instances, I'm sure, where even if people are coming in person 90% of the time, maybe 10% of the time, you will be doing things or having proceedings remotely, conducting hearings remotely. So it's not like an investment that's only going to be relevant for, the next couple of months. It will be for the future. Think of the future. Interpreters are doing the same, upgrading equipment. You know, when COVID hit and I was really hesitant about remote interpretation. I had read up and kept up with remote interpretation, kind of the pros and the cons, and I was thinking about, okay, do I really get equipment? Do I need it? Is this thing going to blow over? Is COVID going to blow over in just a couple of months? I was very hesitant. So now, kind of thinking back and forth, considering the pros and the cons, I finally made the decision to do it. The next day, the next day, uh, one of the courthouses we work with reached out to us and let us know that if you're going to be interpreting at our courthouse, you're going to need remote interpretation equipment because we are conducting everything remotely. So there you have it. I was going back and forth, but it is actually very, very relevant. So update the equipment. It will be worth it. It will be used. The next day, or excuse me. So next topic, how to use Zoom's interpreter platform. Um, so originally Zoom did not have a platform or a function dedicated for interpreters, but now it does, in particular for simultaneous interpretation. Again, this is for simultaneous interpretation. So if a hearing is being conducted or if a trial is going on and the LEP, the respondent, the petitioner, does not need to speak, then Zoom's interpreter platform is perfect. Now, in the case of consecutive, where a person speaks and then the interpreter interprets and they take turns going back and forth. This person speaks, interpreter interprets. Then in that situation, you don't want to use this platform. It's not the best. In this platform, your LEP will call in to the language that they want to and hear it. So if we have someone who speaks Korean who's having a hearing, they put headphones on that's connected to the Korean channel on Zoom, and then they just hear the Korean interpretation of everything. So the first step, if you are unfamiliar and you want to know how to use Zoom's interpreter platform, is to make sure you have the right account. As you can see here, Zoom has several options. There's a basic free option, there's a pro option, there is a business, and there is an enterprise option. So the interpreter platform is only available for business and enterprise. So make sure that your account is either business or enterprise. Once you have that set up, then you will need to go into the settings in Zoom. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there is on the menu bar a section titled In Meeting Advanced. In Meeting Advanced, there should be a language interpretation option. you want to make sure to turn this on. If by chance you have the meeting, or excuse me, the business or the enterprise account, and you do not see language interpretation option in meeting advanced, then reach out to Zoom. Send a ticket to Zoom and let them know, hey, I'm signed up, but I don't see the option, and then they will take care of you. There are instances like that, so please check and make sure that it is there. The next thing, schedule your meeting, schedule the hearing or schedule the trial, whatever it is. So when you schedule, you are going to have your start date, the duration, the meeting ID, all of these things. At the very bottom, you will see interpretation. Then you can enable, or you will need to enable the language interpretation. Then you add an interpreter. You put in their email address to invite them. And then you have their language on the right-hand side. You can see here the language. And once you put their language in, you are going to schedule that person. If you made a mistake and you want to get rid of the interpreter, then you click X, and that is not a problem. So you should schedule beforehand. Zoom now has a function where you can actually add interpreters after you start the hearing, but I would recommend to take care of everything up front. Now, when you join Zoom, you want to choose computer audio, join with computer audio, not phone call. And the same thing for your LEPs. Now, with the interpreters, here's where you will look and see the name of the interpreter. The name that we have here is Chewbacca, right? So just throwing an example out there. Funny example, right? So Chewbacca, and then you press start. Once you do that, your participants will receive a notice that looks like this. You have been assigned an interpreter. It will show English and then the name of their language, whatever language that they're going to have interpretation for. So after that, they're going to press OK. And now they will also have the option of switching in between the languages, which means that if they want to hear, their language, the foreign language, they can click on the name of that language. If they want the language that Chewbacca speaks, they can click on that. Or if they want the language that Roger Moore speaks, then you can click on English. They can toggle back and forth. Now, on the how you can do this is on the interpretation or on the Zoom screen, you will see interpretation with a globe icon right above it. And if the respondent clicks there, then they can choose which channel that they want to hear. If it's the English, it'll be the original English that they hear. If it's the Chewbacca's language, then they're going to hear that language through their headphones. Now, if they wanted to end it, or you wanted to make any other, choose any other options, you can do that. Just click on language interpretation and then manage the language interpretation. One thing that I will show you is that there's an option here to mute the original audio. Now, to explain this, the original audio would be English. In this case, we have English and Spanish. The original audio would be English. The judge and the lawyers are speaking English. That's the original. Normally, if a person is listening in using the Spanish interpretation, your LEP is listening in, they will hear Spanish at 80% volume, and they will hear English at 20% volume. So if they wanted to hear the original as well, to hear the Spanish, that's the default. If they want to hear just the English, they don't want to hear any, or excuse me, if they want to hear just the Spanish, but they don't want to hear any English at all, 100% Spanish and 0% English, then you click on mute the original audio. and that's what will happen. So the last part of the presentation is what interpretation equipment should your interpreters have? You are all set up, you know how to use Zoom, you know how to uh, cut out background noise, eliminate it, increase the speed. But now on the interpreter's end, I'm going to share with you what equipment your interpreter should have so that essentially you will be able to pass this along to your interpreters in order to uh, promote the best possibilities for you and a good hearing, a good trial, a good meeting, whatever it is. Most of what I'm going to be showing you is from Kudo's Thinkific platform. Now, Kudo is a multilingual conference or multilingual meeting interpreter platform. So you can almost think of it like Zoom, except Kudo is especially for interpreters. It's designed for interpreters. It's very well known amongst interpreters today. Even the I don't remember his exact position, but maybe the VP. He was a chief interpreter at the UN for some 20 odd years, if not more. And he, is at Kudo. So Kudo knows what they're talking about and understands the interpretation or the particulars of interpretation. So these are suggestions from Kudo of what your interpreter should have. The first thing is that uh, the computer or the laptop that your interpreter should have at least 8 gigs of RAM, an Intel i7 core processor, a 15-inch monitor, and a cordless mouse. Cordless mouse is very important because you don't want to, while interpreters are interpreting, they don't want to be on the computer with a mouse and a cord, especially if they're moving their mouse and clicking and you hear the cord moving across the desk as they move the mouse. You want to cut down on as many noises as possible. So that's very important. And of course, you want to have a good, fast, efficient computer. So those specs are recommended. In addition to having a dedicated sound and graphics card. Next, headsets. As you can see here, your interpreter should have headsets. There's another option, which I'll get into, but 2 professional grade USB headsets, not the 3.5 millimeter jack. The USB headsets essentially are better when it comes to sound. Even from what I understand, each of these has a dedicated sound card within it. So you have the sound card within the headset itself, and then in addition, you have the computer sound card. So you want, they should have 2 headsets, and for reason being that if you're in the middle of an interpretation and one headset goes out for whatever reason, it suddenly breaks, I don't know, you drop it right before the interpretation and it's not working. Whatever the case, you should, or the interpreter should have 2 backup. Suggested models, the Logitech H650E, which is actually what I have on right now. There's the COS CS300, the Sennheiser PC131. There are many good ones. You can actually look up these, or your interpreters can look these up online. It's not difficult to find. Just maybe Google search best headphones for RSI, best headphones for remote simultaneous interpretation, and then that will come out. Another thing that interpreters can do is they have headphones and then have a separate microphone. So the headphones and then a separate microphone, like a Yeti or a Blue Yeti microphone. Almost if you look at, radio stations, you'll have the speaker, they'll have, some big headphones on, and then they'll have the microphone, which is separate. It's not attached as this is attached. That's another option. Both are very good. You just have to have good quality equipment. So as far as the USB headsets, a little bit more, you want them to be lightweight and easy to wear, even for long periods of time. Like these have padded ears. It's very easy to go around my head. There is also a flexible boom arm that allows, you can bend with the hand. You can actually move it out like this, or you can move it in as such. and then I can rotate it so that I can have the mic on the other side of my face, like this. Where it was originally on this side, now the microphone is on this side. This also has an inline mute and volume control. If you look here, if I wanted to mute or increase or decrease the volume, then I can use this, which is attached to which is part of the cord for the headphones. So I don't need to use the computer. It also has built-in USB connectors, which are hooked into the computer now. I can't really show you, but it's a USB piece. And then two earpieces plus the built-in microphone. The important thing about this is, like, if you, sometimes interpreters will want to hear their own rendition. They want to hear themselves. And some interpreters like to take the earphone and go like this, and which is fine. But the thing is, there are some headphones where there's only one earphone. If there's only one earphone, let's say, for example, this side does not have an earphone, then I will always be hearing everything in one ear. Now, if I wanted to hear in both ears and get the ensure the most sound that I can hear the most, I wouldn't be able to do that. But now with this, I have the option. I can go back and forth, right, between listening to everything and then listening to my own rendition. So it's good to have earphones on both sides to allow for that. Next is the APC Smart P UPC unit, which is, in short, it's a backup power supply. If an interpreter is interpreting and suddenly the lights go out, the power goes out, you know, when the power goes out, you have to go to the fuse box and all of that. If you're in the middle of an interpretation, you don't want that to happen, and then all of a sudden you disappear from the Zoom meeting. With a backup power supply, when the computer is hooked up to it, then you just keep going. Even if the power goes out, then you just keep going. This unit allows you to be able to do that. Here I have a suggested model for the APC UPS 1000 VA sine wave. There are many models. Again, this is just what is being recommended from one company. Your interpreters, of course, can look into other equipment. That is not a problem. Next thing, some best practices. You want to use Google Chrome or Firefox. Those are typically the most efficient browsers for interpreters. Always use a silent keyboard. You don't want to be on the line and then you hear your interpreter, you know, all of this and the keys knocking against the keyboard. Always carry a spare headset, as I have said before, and be sure to deactivate any automatic upgrades, any app notifications, any other Skype calls before you start interpreting. These are some of the best practices for your interpreters. Also, make sure your computer comes with the Ethernet, the built-in network cable jack, as I said before. It is also very good to reboot the computer before you start interpreting. One is just to make sure that everything is fresh. So right before interpreting, you know, maybe in the morning before that interpreter starts, they should reboot the computer. But I would even also recommend at least 24 hours before the assignment you reboot, because, and thank you, Zach, who is IT at Waukesha County Courthouse in Wisconsin, for pointing out that sometimes you reboot the computer and then all of a sudden the computer has updates. So you want to make sure to go through those updates. You guys know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you reboot and then it takes, you know, 15, 20 minutes, or some cases an hour, and you're like, oh my goodness, the computer's updating. You didn't know it was going to update, but the computer just started and went along on its own. So you want to make sure, it's good to have updates, but you want to make sure that nothing like that will occur before you start interpreting. So recommend this to your interpreters. Also, have an extra power cable and charger for your laptop. So that way, if one breaks or if one goes out, then they can just plug it right back in, not a problem. So there you have it. Zoom with interpreters, tips and tricks to minimize lag, avoid bad connections, and more. That was our presentation. We went over how to minimize lag and get a good connection, how to make that connection faster, getting rid of background noise and preventing people from going to places like Mickey D's for a hearing. You do not want that. When people are using their cell phones, how to deal with that. Also, how to use Zoom's interpreter platform and the equipment that your interpreters should have before they step into the courtroom. And if you follow all of these steps, you will be successful. You will be successful. So if you enjoyed this presentation, then there are other presentations and articles that Midwest Korean Translation has, and also that I am working on. Including 2 insider tips to heavily reduce translation fees, 5 keys to working with an interpreter at trial during COVID. If you're preparing for trial, how to best work with that interpreter, how to find an interpreter with a flexible schedule, because we all understand that, you know, there's weather changes. There are changes in lawyer schedules. You go to a hearing and then the trial that was going to be next week, all of a sudden it gets pushed back. All sorts of things like this happen. So how do you find an interpreter that has a schedule that's flexible enough where they will be there even when um, you have these changes in dates? 5 keys to drastically improve your interpreter's performance at trial. 4 crucial steps to selecting a skilled court and deposition interpreter. This is very important. Before you choose somebody, I highly recommend that you check out those 4 steps. And how to find an interpreter for that uncommon language, you know, maybe Tagalog or Karen or Kotakoli. It's not a language. They aren't languages that you often get at court, or maybe it's even the first time. How do you find a court interpreter for that language? I prepared a guide. This one is ready. This guide is ready, so it will walk you through steps on how to find an interpreter for that uncommon language. And finally, the top 3 skills your interpreter should have. So I have these presentations. If they're not a presentation, it's an article and more. The 2 insider tips to heavily reduce translation fees, that is free. Everything else here is free. If you would like to learn more, if you would like access to those, then subscribe to our email list. Go to www.mwkoreantranslation.com. As soon as you go there, you will have the option to sign up for our email list. And currently, as I'm filming this, when you sign up, you will receive our guide on 2 insider tips to heavily reduce translation fees. Each time that I produce a new article, I make sure to send it out. So that's the first step. The second step, if you would like to get access to those, is subscribe on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, you search Robert Holloway and then find me. You will see this picture. Once you subscribe, you will have access to these as well. I send out these articles as soon as they're finished and just share, let people know. I strongly believe that uh, everyone should have access to this information in order that so that we can improve the quality of interpretation and communication in the courthouse or in the law firm. If you are interested in working with Midwest Korean Translation with myself or my team, schedule a phone call. Email address and telephone number are here. Again, we are Korean court interpreters that specialize in criminal, divorce, and personal injury cases, whether it be trials, DEPs, attorney-client meetings, hearings, arbitration, witness prep, expert witness. We provide all of this. And we specialize in Korean. So myself and my team, Korean English speakers, and this is what we do. So thank you for watching. Here is the final list of references I wanted to provide you. Waukesha County Courthouse also has a handbook, if you can see at the bottom, called All Things Interpretation. And this walks you through, even with more details that I provided you in this presentation, on how to use Zoom's interpreter platform. So thank you again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. First, our email list, go to our website, and then go to my LinkedIn page and friend and send a message saying you saw this presentation, I want access, and then we can move forward from there. All right, have a good one.